Hello everyone, I'm Ben, and in this video I'm going to be using Houdini to get underway with making a dog collar. So to begin with, I'm in my object context, and I'm going to go ahead and drop down a geo node by pressing tab and then typing geo. I'm going to double click on the geo node to jump inside of it. And the first thing I want to do for my dog collar is create a grid. And this is going to form the basic kind of the bounds, the leather strip. And then I'm going to select my grid and just press P on the keyboard. Just want to bring up the properties. And here I'm going to set the size. So I'm going to have maybe size of 4 and 40. So I've got this strip of leather, and now I just need to, I'm going to turn on Shift W so I can see the wireframe overlaid. And now I'm just going to choose the number of rows and columns. So the rows, I want to have a nice large number. So I've got plenty of divisions so that I can bend this later on and it'll be a smooth curve. And the columns, well, I don't need so many of those. I just need 2, the edges, these bounding edges. Okay, that's good. Now the next thing, I'd like this to have some thickness, so I'll go and press tab and type poly extrude, or there we go. Press shift enter if you want to drop that down a little bit more smoothly. And so for the poly extrude, I'm going to extrude the back, because right now if I go and add some distance to my extrusion, we can see that it's just hollow on the back. So I'll go and output the back as well. Now it's got thickness all the way around. Beautiful. And the next thing I'm going to do is go and say, all right, I now want to have some control over either putting in holes along here or adding studs or something like that. So I'm going to create a line to do that, to help me do that. So over here, I'm going to press tab and type line. And this, I want this line to be as long as this grid is. So if I change the length of this grid, for instance, the length of the line changes. So I'm going to copy the length of the grid, which is this value here, in my case, the way I've laid it out. So I'll right click in it and I'll choose copy parameter, and I'll come over to my line, and under length, I'm going to right click and say paste relative reference. And you can see that now it's looking to that channel of the grid and the size Y. So I'll just press enter. Cool. So now that if I tick that, we can see it's the right length, but it's the wrong orientation. So I'm going to change the direction to be 1 on the X and 0 on the Y, and see if that lines up. So it looks like this direction should actually be on the Z. So I'll go and type it in like so. Now if I have a look here, I think they're kind of going in opposite directions. So I'll set my direction to be -1. And just to make sure that they're going to have the same starting point, I'm going to adjust the center location for my grid. So over here, we can see it's offset by half. So we can see this is the origin of the world. So I'm just going to make sure that the center of my grid is this value divided by 2. So I'll copy parameter, and then over in the center, just make sure this is moving. That's the one we want, the Z. I'm going to paste relative reference, and I'm going to divide it by 2. And you may not be able to see that. So let me just see. Come in here and divide it by 2. And I've got exactly the opposite of what I'd like. So I'm just going to add in a minus there, and now it's coming where I expect it. So I know that if I change the length of my grid now, right, we can see the line scales with it, and they're both starting out at this point, 0, 0, the origin. All right, great. Now moving along, I'm going to turn off this templating view of the grid, come back to my line here, and turn on my point view. It's a little bit hard, this resolution. Let's see. So we can see there's some points there. And what I'm going to do is say that I'd like to have more points along here. So maybe, let's say 7 for now. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to go ahead and remove the first and last point of my line. So I'm going to press tab and type group my range and connect that one up, and move my display flag down to group by range. And under the group type, I'm going to change from primitives to points. And we can see, as I've got my points turned on, that they're all highlighted at the moment. You can see that in orange. And if I start to increase these values here, for the range start, I'm dropping out, right? It's starting at point number 2, and you can see that's happening there. So I want to actually start at 1, so I skip the first point, and end, right, 1 before the end. So now I've just got these middle ones selected, and then I'm going to invert the range. And so now I've just got the first point and the last point selected. So I'm going to call this group first and last, or first last. And then what I'm going to do is, in my node view, press tab and create a blast node. All right, let's try that again. Connect that up, move the display flag down. You can see it's blasting everything away. So I'm just going to go and choose the group that I want from the drop down here and choose first last. And so now what we can see is that previously the line was longer, but I've blasted that point away and that point away. So the line is now shorter. All right, continuing on. The next thing I'd like to do is to have potentially multiple rows. You can see this is only going to give us one row of holes or studs, and I'd like to have multiple rows of holes or studs. So to do that, I'm going to add multiple lines. And one of the ways it can do that is by copying this line here onto a line that's going perpendicular. All right, and so to show what I'm talking about, I'll go ahead and move this around a little bit, and I'm going to create a new line. And this line, if we go and have a look at it, we can see it's standing upright. That needs to be laid down on this x-axis to follow what I was just describing. So I'm going to have it on the direction be on the x-axis and turn off the y-axis direction. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this line to every point on this line. And so that may seem a little strange, but if I press tab and type CTP, I can drop down copy to points, and this is the object effectively that I'm copying to this control object. And now when I move down, we can see that there are 2 rails, if you like. So each one of these is a rail, and it's being placed along this line here that's running perpendicular. And so the cool thing about this is we can now, if we have this control line, we can adjust the number of rows, and we can also space them out if we like differently. So the other thing is we may want to, you can see right now that as I'm changing this length here, it's spacing out in one direction rather than evenly from the origin point. So what I'll do is I'll just change the origin here for the x value to be half of this value here. So I'm going to copy the length parameter, and in the x, I'll paste it, paste relative reference, and divide by 2. Now it looks like I might have just made that worse, so I'm going to go ahead and drop in that minus, and see, there we go. Instead of double transforms, I've got the intended outcome now. Okay, so with that done, I now just need to go and copy on the desired objects here. So I'm going to go ahead and say I would like to subtract some tubes. So I'll create a tube, pressing tab and typing tube. And instead of this being a primitive type, I'm going to change it to a polygon. And now I just want to go ahead and copy this tube to the points that I've set here in these my lines. So I'm going to press tab, type CTP, and then just run the tube into the left input and the copy to points from above into the right input. Now we can see that they're not quite laid out the way I'd like, so I'm going to go back to my tube and I'm going to add end caps on, and I'm also going to reduce the radius scale. Okay, now I can see that I'd like to have perhaps some more tubes in between here. They're quite sparse along the length. So I'll go to my length controller here, this line number 1, and increase the number of points. And I'll turn off my point view now. So now I have an array of points, and I've got my grid, and so I just need to go, and I'm just going to close this up a little bit, bring the grid down, and then I'm just going to create a boolean. So I'll press tab, type boolean, and drop the cylinder array down into the left input of my boolean and the grid into the right. Okay, so moving my display flag to the boolean, we can see that the operation is doing a subtraction, but I just need to invert that so that it's b from a, b minus a. And we can see that the tubes are not quite tall enough to punch through the top of this, so I'm just going to go and, with the tube, increase the height. And we can see that now we've got holes all the way through. Okay, so in this next step, what I want to do is to go and add a bend modifier to bend this color. So I'm going to press tab and type bend, drop that down and connect it up, move my display flag down to the bend, and then I'm going to go up here and up the bend to 360 because I want a full circle. And we won't see much happening because the capture is looking on the positive z direction. So this is the origin of the world we can see here, and it's capturing in this direction for a length of 1 unit. So that's not going to help me. So first thing is I want this capture length to be the length of this entire strip, so my grid, and the direction is just going to need to be in the minus z. So I'll change that to minus z, and we can see it's just starting to bite or nibble there. So I'm going to grab this capture length as a parameter from my grid. So I'll go up here, right click, and where is that? Copy parameter, come down to my bend, go to my capture length, and paste relative reference. Press enter, and that's looking quite good. And so now I can go, if I want, back to my tubes, and I could change the number of sides if I wanted. So they could be kind of lower polygons, or they could be smoother. Or I may want to go to one of my control lines and say there's going to be less holes or there's going to be more holes. And I may even say, hey, I want fewer rows. But I could also do things like say I don't want to have holes anymore, I want to have studs. So I might do something like, a platonic solid and then drop in a switch here so I can switch between either of these different options. If I've got an art director or something that wants to have a look and see how the different versions look. And so on this switch, you can see that the input right now is looking to input 0, which is the first input, which is this platonic one. So we can see that's not looking quite ideal. But part of the reason is because we want, instead of the boolean to be a subtract, we want it to be a union. And so now it's a little better perhaps. But if we look at this platonic solid, it's a tetrahedron, and I'm just going to switch this over to an octahedron and see how that's looking. And I think basically they're too big. So I might just take this platonic solid and set it to 0.5 and then drop down the bend, and that's looking good. All right, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I hope that helps, and I'll see you in another video.